Imagine for a moment that the words of Jesus, the most influential spiritual figure in history, were never meant to be interpreted literally, but as codes, symbols pointing to a hidden inner reality. Think, what if behind the familiar stories, the miracles and the parables lies an ancient key, a secret wisdom known only to those prepared to awaken? What if the teachings of Christ were not about building churches or following dogmas, but about unlocking the divine power already buried deep within your soul? In this video, we're going to uncover the forgotten truth, the secret teachings of Jesus that were hidden, suppressed, and misinterpreted for over 2,000 years. By the end, you'll understand a message so profound that it could completely transform how you see yourself, the world, and your connection to the divine. And the final revelation, the last and most powerful one, may forever change the way you understand what it means to be human. Before we go deeper, make sure to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and share this video with those who seek truth beyond the surface. What you are about to discover is not for everyone. It's for the few who feel that inner calling, that subtle voice whispering, "There is more." The story of Jesus, as told by the Gospels, is one that millions have heard, but few have truly understood. For centuries, religion has presented his message as a moral code, a set of external rules to follow. Yet the early mystics, those closest to the origins of Christianity, spoke of something far more mysterious, an inner transformation. According to them, Jesus came not to create followers, but to awaken gods. The ancient Gnostic texts, hidden for nearly 2 millennia until their discovery at Nag Hammadi in 1945, reveal a very different picture of the Christ. In these writings, Jesus speaks not of worship, but of self-realization. He teaches that the divine spark resides within every person, and that salvation is not granted from above, but awakened from within. The kingdom of heaven, he said, is not a distant place beyond the stars. It is a state of consciousness already dwelling in the depths of your being. This understanding was dangerous. It gave power back to the individual rather than to the institutions. It taught that the true temple of God was not built of stone but of spirit, that you, the seeker, are the temple. And so, throughout history, these teachings were silenced, their manuscripts buried, their followers persecuted. The outer church triumphed, while the inner path faded into obscurity. But now, as humanity faces a profound spiritual awakening, this hidden wisdom is resurfacing once again. It calls to those who can hear it, those who feel that truth cannot be confined by dogma or fear. Could it be that what Jesus truly came to teach was not religion, but remembrance, the remembrance of our divine origin? If you look closely, the clues were never truly hidden. In his parables, Jesus spoke in symbols that only the initiated could understand. When he said, "He who has ears, let him hear," he was not referring to physical hearing, but to inner perception, the awakened intuition of the soul. His miracles were not displays of supernatural power to impress crowds, but demonstrations of higher laws of consciousness. When he healed the blind, he symbolically healed the blindness of humanity, the inability to see the divine reality that permeates all things. The Gospel of Thomas, one of the most profound of the hidden texts, records Jesus saying, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." These are not the words of a man demanding worship. They are the words of a master guiding humanity to awaken the divine essence hidden within their own hearts. Think about it. Could it be that the cross itself, the central symbol of Christianity, represents not merely suffering and death, but the alchemical process of transformation, the dying of the ego, so that the divine self may rise again? The resurrection, then, is not an event to be believed in, but a state to be experienced, here, now, in this very moment of awareness. The early Christian mystics, the Desert Fathers, and later the Hermetic philosophers, all hinted at this same inner mystery. The path to enlightenment lies through inner stillness, silence, and direct communion with the divine spark. As the great scholar Elaine Pagels noted, the Gnostics viewed Christ not as a savior to worship, but as a guide to awakening. His message was, "Know thyself, for in knowing yourself, you come to know God." And yet, across centuries, this truth was veiled in allegory, distorted by those who sought to control rather than liberate. The question is, are you ready to see beyond the veil? Are you ready to reclaim the sacred wisdom that was once hidden in plain sight? In the next part, we will journey even deeper into the secret symbols, the lost gospels, and the mystical practices that reveal how Jesus taught the path of divine union through inner awakening. Stay until the end, because the final revelation will show you the most profound secret of all, one that has been waiting patiently for 2,000 years for you to remember. To truly understand the secret teachings of Jesus, we must move beyond the literal and step into the language of spirit. Every parable, every miracle, every gesture he made was encoded with universal truths about consciousness, creation, and divine awakening. The scriptures are not a storybook of events, but a map, a guide to inner transformation. The Gnostics knew this. The Essenes before them practiced it, and Jesus, the Master, embodied it. When Jesus said, "You must be born again," he was not speaking of religious conversion or ritual baptism. He was revealing the ancient mystery of inner rebirth, the dying of the ego, and the awakening of the divine spark within. The second birth is not of flesh and blood, but of spirit and awareness. It is the moment when the seeker realizes that they are not a body seeking God, but God experiencing itself through the body. This idea, though profound, is not unique to Christianity. Across the world, the same secret has echoed through the ages. The Egyptians spoke of the death and resurrection of Osiris as the inner transformation of man. The Hindus called it enlightenment, the realization of the self. The Hermetic texts described it as the great work, the alchemical transmutation of lead into gold, the human into divine. Jesus' teachings were part of this same timeless current of wisdom, but few understood. Even his disciples struggled. That is why he often said, "To you it has been given to know the mysteries of the kingdom, but to others I speak in parables." The masses heard stories. The initiates received truth. When Jesus spoke of the blind seeing, he was revealing spiritual vision. When he turned water into wine, he symbolized the transformation of ordinary consciousness into divine consciousness. When he calmed the storm, he showed mastery over the inner chaos of the mind. These are not miracles meant to astonish. They are lessons meant to awaken. The true miracle is not in the outer act, but in the inner realization. Throughout history, the mystics who understood this secret guarded it carefully. They knew that knowledge without inner maturity leads to corruption. That is why these teachings were hidden, not to exclude, but to protect. Only when humanity was ready to look within rather than above would the secret be revealed again. As Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Jung deeply studied the Gnostics and recognized in their writings the same path of inner individuation he taught, the process of becoming whole. He saw Christ not as a symbol of external worship, but as the archetype of the self, the divine totality each human must awaken to. Think for a moment. What if heaven and hell were not places but states of consciousness? What if the devil that Jesus overcame in the wilderness was not an external demon, but the shadow of human ignorance, fear, desire, pride, the illusions that keep us bound? What if salvation is not about escaping the world, but about transforming how we perceive it? When he said, "I and the Father are one," Jesus was expressing the ultimate realization of unity, that the human soul and the divine essence are not separate. This is the same truth the mystics of all traditions have proclaimed. Yet it is also the most dangerous truth because it removes the need for intermediaries. It dissolves the power of external authority and restores it to the heart of every human being. And perhaps this is why his message was altered, reshaped, and limited. When you tell people that God is within, you give them freedom. When you convince them God is outside, you control them. For 2,000 years, the outer temples have thrived, while the inner temple, the heart, has been forgotten. But now the tide is turning. The age of blind faith is ending. The age of direct experience is dawning. Ask yourself, have you ever felt that something sacred lives within you? Something infinite and pure that no suffering can touch? That silent awareness watching behind your thoughts, your fears, your identity? That is what Jesus called the kingdom within. The pearl of great price, the treasure buried in the field. It was never lost, only hidden beneath layers of forgetfulness. In ancient mystery schools, students were told, "Man, know thyself, and you shall know the gods." Jesus brought this eternal teaching to humanity, but few were ready to hear it. The tragedy of religion is not that it preserved his story, but that it buried his meaning. In the next part, we will go even deeper into the hidden symbols of the Gospels, the connection between Jesus and the ancient mystery traditions, and how his message mirrors the universal path of enlightenment found in Egypt, India, and Greece. And finally, we'll reveal the most guarded secret of all, the real key Jesus gave to access the kingdom of heaven within. To understand the secret mission of Jesus, we must explore the hidden currents of wisdom that flowed beneath the surface of ancient spirituality. His teachings did not arise in isolation. They were part of a vast river of sacred knowledge, the wisdom of Egypt, Babylon, India, Persia, and Greece, which converged in the Middle East during the 1st century. Jesus was the culmination of this universal current, the living synthesis of all ancient mysteries embodied in human form. Many scholars, such as Rudolf Steiner and Mircea Eliade, observed that the teachings of Christ carry echoes of the ancient initiatory traditions. In those schools, the seeker underwent symbolic death and rebirth to awaken the divine consciousness within. The same pattern is found in the life of Jesus: baptism in the Jordan, 40 days of temptation, crucifixion, and resurrection, not merely as outer events, but as stages of spiritual initiation. Each represents a transformation of consciousness that every soul must pass through on the path to divine realization. The Essenes, a mystical Jewish sect of which many believe Jesus was associated, practiced purification rituals, silence, and inner contemplation. Their aim was to prepare the body and soul to become a vessel for divine light. They spoke of the teacher of righteousness, a figure who would embody divine wisdom and reveal the inner law, not carved on tablets of stone, but inscribed in the heart. Does this not sound like the mission Jesus fulfilled? When he said, "The law is written upon your hearts," he echoed this ancient truth. He was calling humanity away from outer obedience toward inner awakening. The temple he wished to build was not one of stone but of spirit, the living body of awareness where the divine and human merge. Look carefully at the symbols. The dove descending at his baptism represents the descent of the Holy Spirit, the awakening of higher consciousness within the purified vessel of man. The wilderness symbolizes the inner battle between spirit and desire. The miracles symbolize mastery over the illusions of separation. And the resurrection is the great alchemical symbol, the triumph of spirit over matter, the realization that consciousness is eternal. These symbols are not limited to one tradition. The Egyptians told the story of Horus, the divine sun who overcomes darkness. The Greeks told of Persephone's descent into the underworld and return to light. The yogis of India spoke of the awakening of Kundalini, the inner fire rising through the centers of consciousness, leading to union with the divine. Jesus' life was the living mirror of this same path, the archetypal journey of the soul returning to its source. But what happened after his departure changed everything. The early followers, inspired by mystical experience, gathered in secret. They practiced what Jesus had taught them directly: silent prayer, contemplation, and the communion of spirit. They knew that the bread and wine were not mere rituals, but metaphors for spiritual nourishment, the body and blood of divine consciousness itself. The real communion was the merging of the human and the divine within. However, as time passed, the living experience turned into doctrine. The mystical became political. The Roman Empire adopted Christianity, but in doing so, transformed it from a path of inner liberation into a structure of control. The outer story remained, but the inner fire was dimmed. The councils decided what was orthodox and what was heresy, and the Gnostic Gospels, those that spoke of inner illumination, were suppressed. Yet the truth could not be destroyed. It survived in secret orders and hidden manuscripts, whispered among mystics and seekers. It reappeared in the Hermetic teachings of Alexandria, in the Sufi poets of Persia, and in the words of Meister Eckhart, who said, "The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me." It lived on in the hearts of those who sought truth, not authority. What Jesus taught was never meant to be confined to one religion. It was a universal science of awakening, a direct experience of oneness with the source. He spoke in the language of his time, but the essence of his message transcends time. That is why his words still resonate today, for they speak not to the intellect, but to the soul. Think deeply. What if the real second coming of Christ is not a person descending from the sky, but a collective awakening of Christ consciousness within humanity? What if the prophecy is not about the end of the world, but the end of ignorance, the dawning of divine awareness in every heart? Could it be that we are now living in that age of revelation, when what was hidden must finally be seen? In the final part, we will uncover the most powerful truth of all, the very heart of Jesus's secret message, the key that unlocks the kingdom of heaven within and reveals the path to living as a divine being in the world of form. Now, we arrive at the heart of the mystery, the final and most powerful revelation of all. Everything Jesus ever said, every parable, every symbol, leads to this one truth. The kingdom of heaven is not a distant realm to be reached after death. It is the awakened state of consciousness that reveals itself when you realize your oneness with God. This is the secret teaching that has been hidden, distorted and forgotten for 2,000 years, yet it has never ceased to shine quietly in the soul of every seeker who dared to look within. When Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is within you," he did not speak metaphorically, he meant it literally. Heaven is not a place but a state, the state of complete union between the human and the divine, between the temporary and the eternal. In that moment of realization, there is no separation, no I and thou. There is only presence, the living awareness that is God itself, experiencing existence through you. This is why Jesus spoke of the Father not as a distant deity, but as an indwelling presence. "The Father and I are one," he said, not because he was unique, but because he had realized what we all are. He came to show the way, not to create worshippers, but awakeners. He never asked to be idolized. He asked to be followed in consciousness. His path was the path of direct experience, the journey from ignorance to illumination. Consider the words from the Gospel of Thomas. "When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that you are the sons of the living Father." This is not poetry. It is instruction. It tells us that the divine revelation does not come from books or temples, but through inner knowing. Self-knowledge is God-knowledge. When you truly know who you are, beyond name, beyond thought, beyond form, you discover that your essence is divine. That is the moment of resurrection. That is salvation. The modern mystic Joseph Campbell once said, "The goal of the hero's journey is to make the sacred known in the world." And that is exactly what Jesus embodied. He did not teach escape from life. He taught transfiguration of life. He revealed that heaven is here when consciousness is awake. His crucifixion was not only his suffering, it was the symbolic death of every seeker who surrenders the ego, the false self, to let the eternal self rise. The resurrection was the victory of spirit over illusion, the unveiling of the eternal nature of being. But the world misunderstood. Humanity continued to seek God outside, in idols, in rituals, in fear. And yet, the Christ within each person has never been absent. It waits patiently, silently, for the moment we turn inward. When you silence your mind, when you dissolve the noise of separation, that light begins to shine. You feel it as peace, as love, as an infinite presence that holds everything. That is the same light that shone through Jesus, through Buddha, through every enlightened being. It is not different. It is the one eternal consciousness expressing itself through many forms. Now ask yourself, what would happen if every person on earth suddenly realized this? Wars, greed, hatred, division, all would fade, because we would see that there is only one life flowing through all beings. This is what Jesus called the kingdom, a world transformed by inner awakening. It begins not with nations or governments, but with one individual who dares to awaken. It begins with you. You see, the true Church of Christ is not made of walls or stones. It is the awakened heart. The true prayer is not spoken by words. It is the silent alignment of your being with divine will. The true miracle is not walking on water. It is walking on earth with awareness. And the true salvation is not escape from sin, but liberation from ignorance, the forgetting of who you really are. Modern science, too, is beginning to glimpse this truth. Quantum physics suggests that the observer and the observed are one, that consciousness itself shapes reality. The mystics have always known this. Jesus said, "As you believe, so shall it be done unto you." This is not superstition, it is spiritual science. The mind aligned with divine awareness becomes a creative force. Faith is not blind belief. It is the knowing that what you seek you already are. So how do we access this kingdom within? The answer, though simple, requires courage. Be still. Know thyself. Silence the mind. Seek not in the heavens, but in the heart. The moment you withdraw your attention from the illusions of separation and rest in pure awareness, you will feel it, that eternal presence, the Christ within. It was never absent. It was only obscured by thought and fear. As the mystic Meister Eckhart once wrote, "The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me." In that realization, there is no me and God. There is only God. That is enlightenment. That is the secret Jesus came to reveal. And now, after 2,000 years, humanity is ready to remember. The veil is lifting. Across the world, souls are awakening, feeling the silent pulse of the divine within. This is the true second coming, not of a man, but of consciousness itself. Christ is not returning to the world. Christ is awakening in the world, through you, through me, through all who remember. So as this message comes to an end, remember this: the kingdom of heaven has never been lost. It was never far away. It has always been within you, waiting for you to look inward and say, as Jesus did, "I and the Father are one." The secret teachings of Jesus were never meant to create followers. They were meant to awaken creators. You are not here to believe. You are here to become. And that, dear seeker, is the truth that has been hidden for 2,000 years, until now. Thanks for looking.